Good afternoon. We will get started in just a couple minutes. Welcome to the September installment of the Faces of Agriculture and USDA Speaker Series, hosted by the USDA Office of Partnerships and Public Engagement. The purpose of this speaker series is to connect students with current USDA researchers, scientists, technicians, engineers, foresters, and other STEM-related program managers to learn about their story, career path, and exciting projects and initiatives they may be working on at USDA that serve the public interest while helping to inspire the next generation of agricultural workforce. In addition to today's speakers, we invite students to visit USDA's Youth and Agricultural website to learn about more about internship, scholarship, and other great programs for youth. The website can be found at usda.gov/youth. Before we begin, we ask all attendees to place their phones and devices on mute. This event will be recorded, and a copy of the recording will be available to participants by the end of the week. We welcome and encourage questions for our speakers. If you have any questions for our speakers, please place your question in the chat box, and we will address all questions at the end. I want to take a moment to thank our speakers and participants for taking time out of your busy schedules to learn and grow as a community. Without further delay, I would like to introduce our speakers. Ron Batcher is an architect for USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. Ron obtained a Master's of Architecture from Norwich University. Before joining the USDA, Ron had a 19-year career in the private sector. He owned and managed a design and construction company and has worked extensively in residential and commercial architecture with a focus on historic preservation. Ron joined USDA in 2017, where he has worked to improve the wholesale market and facility design program, which provides no-cost architectural design services to stakeholders across the U.S. for food-related facilities, food hubs, farmer markets, wholesale markets, and other food facilities. He is the USDA lead for the Wholesale Market and Facility Design Program, Architectural Design Technical Assistance, serves on the Board of Directors for the Employee Services and Recreation Association, and serves as the Communication Director for the USDA Ag Running and Walking Club. Sasha Pokrovskaya joined USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service as an architect in the Marketing Services Division in March 2020. She joined Ron, the only two architects in all of AMS, in providing conceptual design services to the local and regional food sector, wholesale produce markets, as well as communities seeking to connect their downtown food assets to other amenities. Sasha transitioned from the private sector where she previously worked for architectural firms, providing design services for clients in the high-end residential field, as well as various projects for churches. Sasha moved to Washington, D.C. from Denver, Colorado, following graduation from the University of Colorado, Denver, where she earned a Master of Architecture degree. Prior to the transition to architecture, Sasha studied biology at Occidental College in Los Angeles and then worked at the Colorado Department of Agriculture. Without further delay, I introduce to you our speakers for today.
Thank you, Ruby. Hello, everyone. I'm Ron Badger, and thanks for that great introduction. I'm here along with Sasha, the two architects, as Ruby mentioned, and the Agriculture Marketing Service. So I'll start off with how I started, and it was really kind of at an early age. So my high school offered a really great couple set of sequences for classes that you could take, and I chose to go to the technology field, mainly because my father was in construction when I was very young, and that led me to be one of a handful of students that was selected in my high school, fortunately, to co-op in a career field of my choice. So before I actually got into this program, I was thinking of going as a civil engineer into the Coast Guard, but that changed when I started working at Synthesis Architects with this goofy group here. I'm the one on the upper right-hand side. I looked at the date and I can't believe it's been 22 years since this photo. So that was actually my senior year in high school. I ended up actually finishing my hours of that was required in a little bit less than 3 months, and they ended up hiring me full time after that. So that's how I got started. The buddy next to me on my left, he's actually introduced me to my college. So he kind of like just started my whole career, which was really great. Now, skipping past a few years after I graduated, I started working at EYP and started working on some really fantastic projects. FDR Presidential Library was one of them. I was kind of focused on historic preservation in that firm at the time. I worked at 5 different firms over my career before starting at the USDA. So FDR is actually the first president to build a library to hold all of his presidential notes and publications. Prior to that, all of those notes and all the documents were privately owned by the presidents, and no one was ever really able to see any of that collection. Many of them were lost to history or went into people's private collections, or they ended up being destroyed. So I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to work on this project, being one of the first presidential libraries. And the project, we actually brought a lot of his collection out to the public, which was much of which was behind closed doors at the time in this facility. So if you go there today, you could see much of his collection. He has some really great collection of things that were donated to him during his presidency and his vast collection of ship models. Go ahead, Sasha.
Thank you, Ron. I'm originally from Moscow, Russia. I immigrated to the United States when I was 9 years old, and I was actually the recipient of the Pell Grant and the scholarship to attend Occidental College, where I studied biology, and that was fascinating to me. The study of biology is really about the study of systems, and there are so many complex variables. That really helped me prepare as I realized that I wanted to do something more artistic and something that worked directly with people and the ability to help people. The kind of systems knowledge helped me to prepare for the study of architecture. So I worked at the Colorado Department of Agriculture in the private sector for a bit before I decided to study at the University of Colorado in Denver. I was lucky enough to study abroad in a few places during my graduate studies and see architecture, great architecture around the world. My first job when I moved out here to take this job after graduate school was at Harrison Design here in Washington, D.C. And I was lucky enough to work on some really big church projects. This was really a challenging project. For me, being straight out of school, I learned a ton, and that's one of the things I'd like to highlight about the field of architecture is that there is always mentorship, and mentorship is a very strong part of the field. You're always learning and passing down knowledge from generation to generation. I'm grateful to my mentors throughout my education and my mentors at this firm that helped to guide me through this process where we were preparing construction documents for this church. It's in construction right now. You can see some of the photos of the steel frame going up, and that it's almost nearing completion. So these are some of the photos early on. Yeah, next slide.
So also at UIP, we got to work on, like I said, many different projects. And this project here, Building 53, is now currently GE's Renewable Energy Global Headquarters. It is where they monitor all of their renewable energy across the whole entire planet. So as you can see on the upper left-hand side, this was the building prior to the renovations. It was a heavily manufactured building, and when you work with old buildings, you always expect to have some kind of issues. You know, you have some lead paint and asbestos that need to be cleared out. So this project kind of was a little bit interesting being on such a industrial site. There was actually PCBs in the concrete. So this building had an extensive amount of work done to it to bring it to the point that you see here. It's a great building. It's about 500,000 square feet. You know, it's a great transformation, and it's a really, you know, a focal point of their site there in downtown Schenectady. Sasha?
This is another project I worked on with Harrison Design. This was different in that I came on right at the beginning when we were just starting to lay pen to paper. The site had a historical church that had been demolished, and the community wanted to honor the original historic building and have something inspired by that. So we started working with them, developing the program, which is to say we asked them questions about what kind of building they wanted, what they wanted to include in this church. And then we started to develop these computer renderings, these photos or drawings that look like photos to give them a vision of what the project will look like. And this highlights that architects really have to be aware of so many factors, such as the economics, the construction methods, labor costs, and other factors that threw some wrenches into the project, and a lot of cooperative. There was a need to really work with the community and work with the client, work with the builders in order to be able to move this to construction, which is where it is now. Next slide.
So another really great project that I was fortunate to work on is this building here. It's actually the location of the first Women's Rights National Convention in 1848, where an estimated 300 people gathered at the chapel, including Frederick Douglass. He was one of them. They spent 2 days there, and at the end of their convention, 68 women and 32 men signed the Declaration of Sentiments, drafted by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the McClintock family. Over the years, it was turned into many things, many numerous businesses, an automotive shop, a movie theater, and by the time our firm got there, the image up on the left-hand side, this is how the building was there after a a contest or a design competition in the 1990s to kind of bring it back to kind of a historic nature. What they didn't really realize at the time is doing so with just the two walls exposed much of the interior brick, which was not meant to be outside, to the elements, and the building started to deteriorate. So we spent a couple years on the design and the construction of this project. It turned out really great. We're really proud of it. And this project is kind of unique as well because the only image we had of it was during the late 1900s. It was very far up on a hill. We saw two chimneys and took a lot of the design and the elements for the structure actually from written documents from the time of people actually describing the chapel from being there. So another little happy outcome of this project is this is actually where I met my wife. She was the superintendent of this park when I was there as a project manager. So it was a happy ending all around. Sasha?
Great. So prior to coming to DC to work at Harrison Design, I actually interned while I was in graduate school in a couple different firms, and one of them was doing high-end residential in Colorado, and then I moved here and also worked on house designs. This is not a house that I worked on, but it's typical of the houses we designed here in the area as well as across the nation. This house is actually located across the river from our office, more or less. One of the great things about working on house designs is that it allows a intimate relationship with clients and to really think about how the space will be used. That's a great preparation for public work because every time we design something, we're really thinking about how are people going to be navigating that space? How are people going to be interacting in that space? And if that space is doing the best they can to serve its purpose and to serve the community. Over to you, Ron.
So I bet at this point, you're all wondering, what the heck does architecture have to do with agriculture? I actually was wondering the same thing back in 2016 when I applied for the position at USDA. So the program actually started in the 40s with the development of wholesale markets across the United States. It was actually part of an act of Congress that directed the USDA to turn what you see on the upper left-hand side there, what was traditional street markets and just trucks pulling up and selling their produce, to what you see in the center, which is Philadelphia Produce Market. We worked extensively across the United States to turn those street markets into a central distribution center in many major cities across the U.S. And we're really looking forward to being part of, what comes next in the future for markets. And we see a lot of that changing, especially with the current situation with COVID right now. So, we're still working through how that's actually going to affect what we do to design and what other markets look like in the future. Sasha? Great.
So asking the question exactly, how do we do that kind of design? As Ruby mentioned in the introduction, that we serve a variety of stakeholders. Sometimes we work on very large projects and sometimes they're really small farmers markets. We'll look at the environmental issues and the impacts that they will have, looking at the site, which means the actual place, the location where a building or a farmer's market may be located, and looking at the layout. How are people going to be getting there? And what other, maybe it's really hilly and that throws a complication in, or maybe it's flat, maybe so flat that water doesn't drain at all. And all kinds of things that we have to think about as we're preparing these drawings and working with the clients. We'll look at the initial design concepts that someone else may have, or we'll prepare them for our stakeholders. You can see Ron over here at a meeting doing some sketches and beautiful work there. Look at programming, which is what kind of needs does the client have? What kind of spaces can we fulfill? Then we'll move into floor plans, elevations, which is the building from the outside. How does it look? And then a of course, we can never forget about the cost of something. How expensive is it to build? We're not contractors. We won't tell a client specifically that, but we'll give them some rough ideas so that people can start thinking, is this $5,000 or $5 million? And then we'll work. And sometimes we have to crush some dreams when we do a little bit of a reality check. Or on the other hand, help people dream and think about what the potentials are for their site. And so then we'll work with the local design professionals and really the people that are going to be bringing our concepts or the dreams of the community to fruition. And as we do that, we'll offer a third-party design review services. So we'll work with the stakeholders to look at the drawings and give them some advice. Back to you, Ron.
So what we think about when we do our design work, the possibilities are really endless. But these are kind of the ones we focus on specifically when we're trying to make a project really work for our stakeholders. You know, how many vendors are they going to have? What's really important is how many years in operation they have if they're going to actually go from a tent farmers market to a permanent structure. You know, loyalty definitely has a lot to do with the viability of farmers markets and other food facilities. So people know like that it's there. It's, you know, what time of the year are they going to be open? Is it just going to be a seasonal market? Is it going to be a year-round building? How many farmers are interested in providing for the markets? Who are your customers? How far are they coming? What kind of background do they have? Is it urban? Is it rural? There's a lot of factors that come into play when we're designing a building. And then the end use. How are people going to use the spaces that we create? These are just some of the things that we think about when we're going into design. One of the projects now, we'll start to show you some of the work that we've done here at USDA Agriculture Marketing Service. The Fair Center in Appleton City. This was a community that was in the middle of farmland, pretty much 45 minutes away from any grocery store. So they were very limited in the local produce that they had there in the community. And when we had our community workshop, and they described to us a little bit about what their needs were. And during our time there, we talked to the community members and really figured out what they needed. So the local farmers, there was a coffee shop in the area that closed up a few years beforehand, and the farmers frequented it every Saturday. It was a place where they went to talk about their produce, to talk about what their challenges were for the week. So they didn't have that any longer. And, you know, when they told us that they actually just grabbed their lawn chairs and the only place they can grab coffee was at the local gas station, they just picked a parking spot and just sat there every week to discuss, you know, how everything was going for the week. So when we started looking at design, having a place like a business incubator where community members can start their businesses, there's a place where people can gather. Also having a lease and shareable kitchen where people can make their value added products, which basically is taking raw produce and turning it into something that has additional value like jams or processed food or processed lettuce. It's just adding a different level to that raw product. And then also having a place where they can aggregate, where they could bring, all the farmers can bring their food and distribute it locally. Like I said, this is a very small community, 45 minutes away from anything. So this was really their community center that brought them all together. And we're still looking forward to seeing this through completion. Sasha?
Another program that we work with is partnered with the Environmental Protection Agency. It's called Local Food, Local Places. The program is in its, was started in 2015. And over that time, it has helped 180 8 communities across the United States. You can see them here on the map, all the way from California to Maine, in Hawaii and Alaska as well. This program helps cities and towns across America protect the environment and human health by engaging with local partners to reinvest in existing neighborhoods that as they develop their local food systems. So basically, we really are interested in supporting the community as in their locally led efforts as they develop their local food systems in order to better the environment, provide more access to local food, provide opportunities for farmers and business, and boost the local economy, among many other benefits that arise from this program. We are currently working with 16 different communities this year. As soon as this call is done, I will be jumping off to help out with Salisbury, North Carolina. Ron?
So everyone always wonders where we do our projects, and the answer is everywhere. You know, we have urban and rural communities that ask for our assistance. It's private, and it's you know, government agencies. It's individuals. Really, anybody can apply to get our services. Our services are no cost to our stakeholders, which is fantastic because we get to help people that wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to hire an architect. I know design services can sometimes be very costly, especially if you're looking at larger projects that are very intricate and have a lot of detail that needs to be put into them. So an example of what kind of looks like a simple project, but it has a lot of background in it. This is a floor plan for 4P Foods. It's a distribution center and storage for this local business who distributes food locally in our area in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. They were growing so fast that they were looking at a new facility, and actually they weren't even actually looking at this building when we got there. They were looking at another facility on the same site, but it was much smaller. It wouldn't have really fit their needs. And while we were there on site, you know, they said, hey, there's another building, you might want to take a look at it. And that's the building that you see in these floor plans here. And it just really met their needs. And they're doing really great work right now. They're really helping out with COVID. For every 10 bags of food they sell, they are donating a bag to local families and local people in need in the community. So they're doing really great work, and it just goes to show that, you know, the work that we do is, you know, helping people down the line. So, Sasha?
Great, thank you, Ron. The question arises, what kind of buildings do we design? And the first answer is that they're not necessarily always buildings. Sometimes we're involved with helping to lay out tents or other temporary structures. Maybe even some food trucks that come along and are involved in farmers markets, helping to figure out where they're going to plug in their outlets and power cords and things like that. Sometimes communities are able and ready to move on to a pavilion-like structure, an open air structure, or perhaps they want to go into something that will be available for the whole year so that they can have more access to fresh food, fresh fruits and vegetables throughout the year. So they would be interested in building something that's adaptable year round. Sometimes communities are interested in having what's called a mixed use space, which means that they have multiple types of businesses that come together. Maybe there are restaurants as well as a community kitchen, commercial kitchen that can be shared, or there's a packing plant and maybe some offices. Really, the possibilities are endless in terms of the kinds of buildings that we work with.
So Sasha talked about the local food, local places, and North Charleston, South Carolina was one of those communities that we helped in 2018. This community was in a food desert. A food desert is where there is any individual that has to travel more than a mile to get fresh produce. This community had to travel quite a bit, and there weren't many people in the community that actually owned a car. So they did a lot of their transportation either by walking or by bike. And the local church owned this little sliver of property on the other side of a very busy highway. And the project was really meant to make a safe connection between a small park and the community. It was designed to kind of get the community more active, there's a walking trail, and to help with their local produce needs, they wanted to turn this into kind of an edible garden. So community members would volunteer to work in this garden, throughout the year to produce for the community. And it was also a place for the community to gather and recreate with, there's a fountain in the center where I'm sure a lot of kids are going to play in warmer weather under that fountain. The community members are really looking forward to this, and it really was dedicated to someone that was really amazing in their community. Mary Davis, she actually, in the 1960s, hosted Martin Luther King to Union Heights. And, so she was really a advocate for this community for many, many years. And they thought this was going to be a great way to honor her with this park. Sasha?
That was great, Ron. So the question also comes up about what kind of structures and materials might be used. And this is a really interesting part of the process because we start to think about the context. We look at the community and look around at what's already built there, what could be reused, what kinds of things would meet the dreams and goals of the community. Maybe there's a structure that's already there, an industrial building that can be repurposed. Oftentimes we'll work with the EPA and look at brownfields, which might be old sites that have been contaminated, but maybe there's something that can be done to remediate those, to make those better and safe for humans again. They might be something that is using a new material, such as cross-laminated timber. This material was actually developed by the USDA Forest Service, and it's using old scraps of wood that may have been thrown away in the past in a sustainable way where they're glued together and very strong now. A lot of these buildings remind us of the traditional wood frame construction that was built throughout the United States. The United States has a great history of wood construction. There might be a vision that the community has in terms of using something that's made out of metal or wood or mixed materials. Sometimes there's innovative practices with fabric, like the Denver International Airport and other fabric-like structures. And of course, we're always considering the environment and trying to be environmentally responsible, integrating whatever methods we can to make the project sustainable. So perhaps one of those solutions that we might recommend may be solar panels or something of this sort. Over to you, Ron.
So we don't always actually work on things that, are funded. This is a great example. It's something we just finished up very recently. A lot of the things that we work on sometimes are just concepts. They're ideas that people want to get on paper, to have images for, where they can take and explain to others what their visions are. It's something tangible they can carry around with them and show others. And this is an example of a very large building that meets some needs of a community and of a city that doesn't necessarily have one of these in it now. The closest one is a state away. So this was a building that local farmers and local meat producers could have their products processed, packaged, frozen, or chilled and distributed throughout the community. This is currently with COVID and with meat processors, there's a lack of that across the nation now. So this also met another need of the area. And sometimes, you know, we just have to work with the community to help them visualize what they want. You know, people usually just come to us with a very long list of wants, and we have to figure out how does that all fit together in a floor plan. Does it really work? And we also have to think about what kind of the local codes and other things that restrict buildings and other things that you know, are mandated, like rooftop gardens that you could see, or renewable energy. And this building, we vision to have both of them. So this is just a really great example of one of those vision projects that we're very proud of. Sasha?
Great, thank you, Ron. So the question of how do people get to where they want to go is very important when we're considering design. Like I mentioned before, my background in biology really helped me to think of things in the systemic way, because it's all those elements that Ron just mentioned in terms of the needs that the community has or the stakeholder has, and then trying to figure out how to meet them, how to be compliant with code. For example, the American with Disabilities Act is law, so the projects have to be compliant when they're to make spaces accessible. We also have to think about the whole chain of people moving through the city or a rural area. Is there public transportation? How far away are people going? Are they going by car, by bicycle? Are they able to walk there? And how are we going to address that from an architectural standpoint? Do we need parking? What is the size of the parking lot? Is the parking lot on a slope? That means it may be challenging for people in wheelchairs to go, or people who have carriages of some kind. And all of those complex ideas have to be synthesized and considered as we're developing a project.
So where do we get our design ideas? They're kind of everywhere. And what I like to say is, you know, throughout history, if something is made, humans have designed it. So I'm very proud to be part of that making team. I'm sure probably Sasha shares the same joy that comes from, you know, putting things on paper, sketching things out, you know, eating donuts, things like that. So, you know, it's a really fun field to be in. Now we get to kind of do the fun part of architecture, where we do the conceptual stuff and pass on all the hard stuff to local architects to finish up. So, Sasha, I'll pass it over to you.
So one of the things that's great about being in this program and working in our team is that we are one of the parts in a very large picture of the USDA and the whole local food supply chain. There are partners. You can see on the right-hand side, bottom right, there are many agencies that are integrated as part of the local food supply chain. And we start out with land conservation, moving into production, actually food being grown. Then food needs to be harvested, processed, and packaged and distributed before it even comes close to being bought or eaten at a restaurant or anything of the sort. And there are many different players in the game, such as our agency, the Agricultural Marketing Services, but also the Farm Service Agency, FNS, Food and Nutrition Service, and so on, that are integral into making this all happen. And I've really, since I've been here and since March, really enjoyed learning so much more about our quite complex food system.
So the local food directory is actually just one of the examples of the things that our little team of a dozen people at the USDA produce. Our little division, we are researchers, we are economists, we're architects, We do a lot of great things for the local food sector, both research and development. So, you know, if you're ever looking to find a farmer's market or find anything that's food related, you know, we can help you find that in your community. Sasha, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Great. So one of the things about the USDA is that it's actually one of the largest departments in all of the federal government. There's nearly 100,000 employees that serve people across the United States in more than 4,500 locations worldwide. There are many jobs and different kinds of jobs. We encourage you to consider whether you're a scientist interested in research, production, processing, distribution. There are so many different types of jobs that are available in the USDA. Back to you, Ron.
So I'm hoping at this point you are all excited about career in agriculture at the USDA. You know, we've shown that there's many different things that you could do at the USDA. There's many different fields. And if you want to connect, you want to find some of those resources, we have this Youth in Agriculture website at the USDA.gov/youth. It's really where you can find, you know, innovation, connections to communicators and producers and educators, and for leaders. You know, go to this website and really take a look at it. There's a vast majority of information. And if you just have a question, you can contact youth@usda.gov with your question. Sasha?
Great. This is a slide showing some of our partners. The National Institute for Food and Agriculture works to advance and promote research-based youth development through research, leadership, collaboration, building capacity, and other organizations. Some of you may be familiar with the FFA, the Future Farmers of America, which is another youth organization that prepares members for premier leadership, personal growth, career success through agricultural education. Some of you may have heard of 4-H, which I just learned stands for Head, Heart, Hands, and Health, where it's a program where kids and teens complete hands-on projects in areas like health, science, agriculture, and civic engagement. And near and dear to our hearts is, of course, the AIA, the American Institute of Architects. It is our professional organization, and it has a great resource called Connectory, which is the largest collection of youth-oriented STEM programs and opportunities in the US. So check out aa.org. Back to you, Ron.
And we also have on that youth website many different opportunities for internships and career opportunities. Please find us on the internet. Go to usda.gov/youth. Look at those resources. Connect with us. Ask questions. We're here to help you. And with that, I hope you have some questions because we're here to answer some.
Thank you both, Sasha and Ron, for sharing with us all about the exciting work you're doing with AMS. We do have several questions for you, so we'll now turn it over to our chat box. The first question that we have is, well, first is, thank you so much for sharing about your journey. What made you choose USDA? What about AMS was appealing to you? And I will throw in there that I know both of you have come from work in the private sector. What made you choose a career in the public sector?
So for me, you know, it was part of a kind of a time in my life. I needed a big change. I had been working in the private sector for so long and seen so many challenges in the private sector. Being part of the USDA and an architect for the Agriculture Marketing Service, you know, our work that we do is pro bono. It's really meant to help the community. It's meant to help individuals, you know, work to build their dreams. And that was something that really spoke to me. And it was just a unique opportunity that does not come around very often. prior to me applying to this job, it would have been almost 20 years since the last architect was hired. So it was an opportunity that I just couldn't pass up. Sasha?
I, like Ron, also wanted, well, it was a kind of a time in my life that came together, and I'm very grateful to be here because I loved working in the private sector, but what was missing is the ability to help people and work with clients regardless of whether they would be able to pay or not. And this is really a unique opportunity to work and serve the greater public. So I'm very grateful to be here and be able to work with communities across the United States in that way.
Thank you. Our next question says, I'm interested in studying architecture, but have a passion for agriculture. Are there a lot of opportunities to engage in this type of work?
So there can be. We're going to work towards making more opportunities for architects in agriculture. We are just two in the agriculture marketing service, but across the nation there are architects. You know, USDA is in every state, and all of our territories there are offices that have positions for architects. In our building in Washington, D.C., there is also an operations team that has architects. So if you are looking to get into architecture and agriculture, there are definitely opportunities for you. Again, go to the usda.gov/youth, look at some of those opportunities. And I think I'm hoping that our contact information will be shared from this, and you could reach out to us directly, and we can hopefully help you find that career that you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. JJ will just ask how many architects does USDA have? Other than AMS, are you aware of any other positions or agencies that hire architects within USDA, or perhaps across the federal sector?
Oh, there are many opportunities. I know rural development, they have offices in all the states and territories, and they have local individuals that work for projects or work with projects. There are a couple architects that we have worked with in rural development across the U.S., especially through local foods, local places. We've connected with them, and we try to work together as a team to provide for these communities across the U.S. So there are also many other different federal agencies that hire architectural staff. I mean, there's the architect at the Capitol that you can also look at. I think the best way to really see all the opportunities out there is go to USDA or
USA Jobs.
Yes, USA Jobs. Thank you, Sasha. It's been a few years since I got on there, so maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Sure, I can speak that there are opportunities with rural development as well. NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Services, I believe there's a number of architects that work there as well. So architects do the kind of work that we do, as well as Ron mentioned, operations. Architects are needed to help with facility design, renovation, and renovation across the country. GSA is the agency in charge of buildings, federal buildings across the country. There are many opportunities as well in the armed forces, actually, that hire their federal positions for architects. Navy, Army, Air Force, they all have architects that help. Also, the other tangential field I would recommend if people are interested in some of this work is to also consider urban design as well as urban planning. In our work in the LFLP communities, we partner with planners that are either at the EPA or they're some of the consultants that we work with. And it really goes hand in hand in terms of trying to come up with solutions that will improve the communities and improve people's lives.
Okay. Thank you. So our next questions, actually, Mark and JJ have similar questions. You may have alluded this to in your presentation, but one is, how can I get you to come out to our community and help out with our farmers market? How do you pick which markets you work with? And are there any costs associated with the process for your services?
So we would love to come out and help you with your local farmers market. So our services are free. The way to connect with our services, we have just a simple one-page form that individuals can fill out, and they send directly to Sasha and I currently. There's no application process. We try to assist all of the people that apply to our resources. Sometimes we get a big backlog. The past few months have been a tad bit slower than usual due to COVID and people focusing a little bit more on other things, but we're getting back into many project requests. So we can share a link that you can find on the website to direct you to that form. And we would love to help you out. Just let us know.
Okay, thank you. And if when you have a moment, if you get a chance, you can type that link directly in the question and answer box, and
yep.
we'll publish it. Mark also says, this is fascinating. Thank you for all your work in preserving our historic locations. And then we had another question stating, how do you envision COVID impacting your designs? Are you still working with communities?
We are still working with communities, and the challenges we see, especially in farmers markets, how do you maintain those social distancing guidelines? We worked with a couple farmers markets very early on in planning. Many farmers markets, sadly, didn't operate this year, or they operated in a different way, doing mostly everything online and pickup only. So I see it changing the industry, the architecture industry as a whole, very drastically. We always thought, our buildings connect people together, and now we really have to consider how we make our buildings in a unique way that still connects people, but kind of at a distance. So it's going to be interesting how things turn out. I mean, right now we're working with guidelines for social distancing, making sure things are spaced apart properly. Sasha mentioned ADA requirements. I think they're going to be very similar to those in the future, depending on how long this lasts. Sasha, you have any thoughts on that?
I think you covered it, Ron. I wanted to address the comment about historic preservation and to go back a question to opportunities, and that there are always, or not always, but that is handled by the Department of Interior. Is actually National Park Service is in charge of historic preservation. So that's another organization to look at in terms of architectural opportunities.
Thanks, Sasha. And when I was in high school, I never really liked history, but when I finally got to get into some of these buildings and learn the history of these buildings, I really love kind of doing the research now and researching history and how architecture has impacted us, throughout the centuries.
Our next question comes from Shelley. Shelley asked, how do you balance the design needs of the current environment while including space to grow in the future?
Wow, that's a great question. It's been another one that we've had to add to our design list, and really considering that during our design phase. How do we, when stakeholders are looking for a building with a specific footprint and a specific budget that is clearly going to be impactful to that, especially when we have to consider people being further apart in buildings. It's going to change air circulation in the buildings and HVAC systems and how people, how do people get from floor to floor? Right now, elevators, everyone, used to jam in elevators, and now many of them are just one person at a time. So, these are things that we really think about when we design projects. And it's, like I said, it's going to be something else that we have to add to our list and really consider for our stakeholders in the future. And if this continues, is that going to actually be part of our code that we need to design by? Sasha, your thoughts on that?
Well, I wanted to mention that our wonderful team at MSD, I'm going to put the COVID question aside for a second and say that some of the insight that we get from our fellow researchers helps to inform, because they're learning about trends and what is happening, what's likely to become more or less popular, and what kinds of things are happening across the country. So they help to inform us and advise on whether they think something is going to be part of the future economy, or if it's really something that's not as popular anymore. And that helps us to advise clients on which elements of their program might need expansion or are not really realistic.
Thank you. Shelley also asked, are there professional organizations for youth interested in this field?
Yes, absolutely. AIA.org. There are youth organizations. You can become an associate AIA member that's working towards your license. They have many resources on their website for youth. There's scholarships. Like I was fortunate enough to be in an internship when I was in high school. Look for those opportunities. There are many out there. Sasha, I know you've had some also, how you got into architecture as well. Maybe you could speak to that.
Well, I wanted to mention the American Institute of Architecture Students, AIAS. There's usually a chapter at every architecture college or graduate program. And there are, in many cities across the United States, there are various architectural organizations or historic preservation boards, various local organizations that might be a good resource for students to engage in their communities and meet local architects by volunteering. Sometimes they do tours or other public engagement programs in schools. And I encourage people to reach out to their local organizations. There might be probably an architect or in the role of a town planner or working with a town planner. There's usually an architect in the local code review board. So I encourage students to reach out and to their communities and the leadership in their communities and start asking questions. That's actually how I started. When I decided to go into architecture school, I was working as a translator at a firm, an architectural firm. And then I sat down with the principal and I said, this is really interesting work. I want to tell me about it. Tell me about the challenges and about the field. And I sat down with 3 architects and they gave me very real advice about the career field and the challenges. It was very helpful. And then I ended up interning with them for a year before I even went to architecture school. And that's a really, be proactive. That's what I encourage students to do. Ask questions and be proactive.
Yeah, and you made me think of another one. Habitat for Humanity is a great way to get hands-on experience actually building things. Knowing how things are put together is really something architects also need to know. Some people like to say we just draw pretty pictures, but we definitely put a lot into those pictures. And there's a lot of knowledge that goes into the design that we work on.
Thank you. I think we may have time to squeeze in 1 or 2 questions, but similar to the last one, do you have any additional words of wisdom for our youth, our students interested in this career field, or life advice? And lastly, what is next for both of you in your career journey?
So advice, start early, get into architecture school. You know, architecture school is really hard. One of the advice that our professor gave us, you know, really work towards your goals. You know, when we first started, you know, it takes a lot of math. It takes a lot of knowledge in history, which I didn't know. You know, I don't know. It's a really impassioned question for me because I went through so much when I was a youth trying to decide what I wanted to do, and I just found the right people. I asked the right questions. I connected with the right people, and I think connections are probably one of the most important things to advancing your career, especially in architecture. Find those people and try to find those community members that you might not know, you know, because they can definitely help you advance. And for me, I'm looking to keep doing what I'm doing. We help so many amazing people, so many amazing organizations across the U.S. You know, right now I can't really even think of doing anything other than that. I don't know about you, Sasha.
Yeah, I agree with Ron. This is a really unique place to be, and I'm looking forward to getting to know more about the food systems and about design. I have to say that is one of the wonderful things about this profession is the ability to continually learn, and that's just part of what we do. Every project is different and unique, and so we are always learning. And I have to say, my one piece of advice to people interested in the field is to draw, sketch as much as you can. Look up YouTube tutorials. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy about it. I even am now trying to do an Instagram challenge to myself so that I sketch every day and post on Instagram just to keep those juices flowing, because that is something unique to our field. And when you're able to draw your ideas, it helps in visual communication. And that's really the role we play, is taking an idea and putting it down onto computer paper or real paper, as the case may be. So I encourage everyone to sketch and draw as much as possible.
Wonderful, thank you. I will now turn it over to Sadie to close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sasha and Ron, for joining us today and sharing your experiences and advice with us. And thank you to our attendees for taking the time to learn and grow with us today. So this includes our September installment of the Faces of Agriculture USDA Speaker Series. And we invite all of our attendees to visit our USDA Youth in Agriculture website at www.usda.gov/youth to learn more about the opportunities to engage and empower the next generation of agricultural leaders. We look forward to having you all join us next month for the October installment of the Faces of Agriculture USDA Speaker Series. Thank you all again.